Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to The Truth. I'm your host, the one you love the most, Niall Hesson, back with a brand new episode here in The Truth. Back once again with my boy AJ Ponciano. AJ, how are you doing here today?
I'm doing great now. How about yourself?
I'm doing great. It's nice to have you back on the show. I gave the fans a little bit of a scoop of why you were not able to hop on the Thursday night show, but no big deal. Obviously, coaches are a priority. But yeah, super fun, super excited to have you back for week 3. Hard to believe. Our start, sit, sleepers, and busts. We're going to do 3 each to get you guys as prepared for the upcoming week in fantasy football as possible. Pretty self explanatory there. So without further ado, why don't you go ahead and give us your first must start?
Yeah, so for my first must start, it's got to be Jordan Mason. I just had to make sure the volume was real. Week one could have been a fluke, and obviously it wasn't. Back-to-back weeks now of 20 plus carries. He has over right around 250 yards, 2 rushing touchdowns up to this point, and now he's going up against a Cardinals defense who hasn't really been that good against the run. And week one against the Bills, uh, James Cook 19 rush attempts, 71 yards. And then just this past week, this who did they play? This Cardinals or this Rams defense gave up 122 yards to uh, James Conner on 21 rush attempts. I mean, they just haven't been good. Jordan Mason has proved that he's going to have the volume no matter what. Up to this point, games they're winning by a lot, games they're winning, or the games that they're losing, close games. He's going to get those rush attempts every single week. If he gets 20 plus touches a week, I mean, he's going to get 100 yards, it seems like.
My first must start is going to be Demarcus Robinson. I think this one's going to be a must start for a lot of people in fantasy. He was the Rams wide receiver 3. Now he's going to emerge as the Rams wide receiver 1 with Puka Nakua obviously on IR, and I believe Cooper Cup is out as well. So obviously big two big wide receivers for the Rams out. Next man up mentality, I think it's going to be Demarcus Robinson. He's definitely had a lot of ads recently, up 24.4% from just last week, now at 50% total rostered in all of fantasy. And that's mainly the sole purpose why I think he's a must start this week. I mean, stat wise, he hasn't necessarily blown it out of the water, 8 and 7 points. I mean, it's good for kind of just some depth on the bench side, but now that he gets his full opportunity to really present himself against a good 49ers team, I think it's going to be, where Matthew Stafford has to find outlets to throw to and guys that are going to be somewhat established. I think this is one of them, and really excited to see what he's going to be able to do against a good 49ers defense. All right, your second must start.
Yeah, so for my second one's going to be Chris Godwin. Godwin had a great week last week. And one of the big things is that he's not going to have Pat Surtain guarding him this week. But Surtain goes and travels with whoever the wide receiver one is. And it's going to be Mike Evans. I think he's going to be on Mike Evans all game. And the only other option that he's going to have to go to is going to be Godwin. I mean, Godwin had what, I think 122 yards, 117 yards, and a touchdown, 7 receptions. Week one, 8 receptions, 81 yards, a touchdown. I mean, he's getting a good amount of volume, and I think the biggest thing about him, I mean, he's only had one target where it wasn't a catch. 8 for 8, week one, 7 for 8 in week two. And past Surtain, I mean, Surtain's locked up every single wide receiver one up to this point. DK Metcalf, he's locked up. He was locking up George Pickens, only held him to 2 catches for 29 yards. I mean, Godwin, I think, should have a good amount of volume. He stays at right around 8 targets, gives you 5 to 7 catches and 80, 90 yards, and most likely a touchdown at this point with the trend that's going.
So my second must start is going to be Baker Mayfield. Now Baker Mayfield is the number one fantasy quarterback at the moment, which is just hard to believe, especially in week 2. I understand it's week 2, so a lot of people are jumping the gun, averaging 24, 25 fantasy points a week, but he's looked really good. And as you mentioned, a big part of that has been the success of Chris Godwin. Mike Evans has kind of been a little bit quiet, right? He hasn't necessarily had the big campaign or start to his season that he's had in the past. It's really been Chris Godwin that stepped up to the plate, some other guys as well. So all in all, Baker's been playing really well, and I think a lot of people are kind of excited. I mean, Baker signed this big extension in the offseason in hopes of, really kind of solidifying himself as that franchise quarterback. Great week 1, took a step back a little bit in week 2 against Detroit, only completing 12 passes, but all in all, that week 1 has really propelled his fantasy value. Now, is he the best quarterback in fantasy? No. Is he going to be for the time being? I guess. And I'm just going to continue to ride the Baker trade until it goes away, and I think that's going to continue to roll here, at least somewhat productive going into a matchup this week against Denver at home. Denver does have a good defense, don't get me wrong, but I think in the grand scheme of things, Baker Mayfield is probably a safe start. He's not probably going to get you the 30 points that he did in week one, but he can get you upwards of 23, 24, even 25. And I actually picked him up in my waiver order. So there's a lot of leagues where Baker is still available just to have as a leverage guy. He's only rostered in 77% of leagues. And as quarterback one, that's an absolute steal. All right, your final must
So
start.
final start, I have Kyle Pitts, and he's had an underwhelming start to start off the year, but they're going against the Chiefs, who have not been good this year against tight ends. Gesicki had a good game, was like 8 catches, 7 catches for 77 yards, and then going back to week one with Isaiah Likely at the tight end position, had a really good game there. Almost had that second touchdown, I believe. I mean, they this Chiefs defense has not been good against tight ends, and Kyle Pitts being one of the most dynamic tight ends, athletic tight ends in the NFL. I just don't see him not getting a lot of volume there, especially with Drake London probably having a lot of coverage against him, Bijan, a lot of focus towards him, and Kirk Cousins finally started having some comfort, especially in that final drive against the Eagles last week. He finally showed that he could push the ball down the field effectively, and he felt more comfortable in the pocket. It seemed like he was actually able to move around and trust his legs a little bit more.
My final must start is going to be Tony Pollard. I mean, Tony Pollard has definitely exceeded expectations, at least from my perspective, at least early on as well. 16, 17 carries in week one, 3 receptions, 5 receptions in week two, and that one touchdown. He's put together a nice couple of weeks, 18.4 fantasy points and 15.2. Again, not a guy that people were expecting to necessarily blow up the page, but he's doing what he needs to do. In 12-man leagues, he's technically an RB1 ranked as the 12th best running back. So there's a lot of things to be excited about here. They're going against Green Bay. Malik Willis revenge game, I guess, for the Packers. But all in all, Tony Pollard should have production on the offensive side. He's going to continue to. I was always a big Tony Pollard fan when he was with Dallas as a RB2, not as much as an RB1, ironically enough. But I'm really liking his position as the number one running back in Tennessee. And I really think that if this trend is going to continue and he's a guy that can consistently be a running back two option, especially since a lot of people were drafting him as probably their RB3, maybe probably more RB4. So for his value, it's a tremendous option. And again, going into a matchup with Green Bay having a good defense, but a lot of ground and pound and a lot of checkdowns to the running backs. All right, your first sit.
So I'm gonna go with J.K. Dobbins, and I know he's been great to start off the year. First 2 games, 266 yards, 2 touchdowns. I mean, he's averaging almost 10 yards an attempt. I don't see that happening against this Pittsburgh defense. Pittsburgh defense has been solid all year. They were really good in Week One against the Falcons. Obviously, it's Bijan, so Bijan still had a solid game. But J.K. Dobbins is not on Bijan's level. And then just this last week against the Broncos, they really held down the Broncos' run game. I mean, Javonte Williams, 11 carries for 17 yards. Their leading rusher was Bo Nix. I mean, I feel like J.K. Dobbins will have a solid game, but I don't expect anywhere close to the type of production that we've seen. Right now, he's averaging at base 133 yards, a touchdown. Like I said, 10 yards per attempt. I don't see that happening. I mean, this linebacker crew and defensive line for the Steelers are great, and I don't expect Dobbins to have a great game, especially or even close to the games that he has. Maybe closer to maybe 60, maybe 75 yards this game at the very most.
My first sit is going to be Tank Dell. He's had a very disappointing start to the year, currently ranked as the 68th best wide receiver in fantasy. Last week, a disappointing 2.3 fantasy points, had 1 reception for -3 yards, 3 carries for 16 yards, just really bad. I wasn't a big Tank Dell fan going into the season. I know some people were. I didn't really understand why, but I'm going to continue to echo this point. I mean, clearly he's not the top option there. Stephon Diggs seems to kind of evolve into that role, and some other receivers like Nico Collins as well. But Tank Dell kind of just got kicked to the curb. And I think Tank Dell is honestly going to be utilized more in the running game than he will the passing game, which is obviously going to hinder his production and play. So it's one of those things where I think this is definitely a must sit. He is going against the Vikings. Vikings defense can be very spotty at times, and they are prone to letting guys that haven't had success maybe in weeks prior have success. So there is potential for him to boom, but I think Tank Dell, at least in this matchup, is either going to boom or bust, and that's one of the things that does concern me, which is one of the reasons why I'm trying to avoid him as much as possible throughout the season, but really in this matchup here, and until he kind of proves me wrong type thing consistently. Okay, your second sit.
Yeah, so nice I have Tank Dell also. He just seems like the odd man out. I mean, you went over the stats already. Nico's that down the field, push the ball threat, big target, like 6'4" guy. Diggs is more that underneath guy, short range, like 10 to 15 yard type of guy underneath. Tank Dell, I mean, like I said, odd man out. I mean, he's the guy who's supposed to push the ball down the field with the speed, but that's not how this offense is built. Maybe it could be a little bit different with Joe Mixon potentially being out, not playing this game, and it being uh, their backup running back at this point, Dameon Pierce. I don't really know. Like I said, I haven't seen production. He just seems like the odd man out. His targets went down. He went from 7 to 4. Uh, 4 total receptions, 3 to 1. I mean, just like you said, he's going to be utilized more of like a jet sweep wide receiver and more in that running game. Maybe a little bit more Jaden Reed, but their offense also isn't built around for him to be a Jaden Reed type of player.
My second one's going to be Isaiah Likely, and I think I said him as a sit last week, but I'm going to pump the brakes on Likely once again. This is one, and same with Baker Mayfield, why results are technically skewed. I mean, Isaiah Likely is technically the tight end one, and I mean it helps that guys like Kelsey and Laporta and even Andrews and McBride have been disappointed to start the year, but that's just because of the explosive week he had in week one and how bad the tight end position as a whole has been playing. So I'm pumping the brakes on Isaiah Likely. On top of that, the Ravens have been struggling, and it doesn't get any easier for them. The Ravens are going into this matchup at Dallas, potentially going to go 0-3. Isaiah Likely, again, did cool down from the first week where he had 9 receptions, 111, and a touchdown. Only 2 receptions for 26 yards. That's what I was expecting. I thought a lot of people were kind of jumping the gun saying, hey, like Isaiah Likely, is next man up. And that could be the case. And we've seen spurts where he's been able to have tons of success. But I think the biggest thing with him, and I guess moving forward for Isaiah Likely is, yeah, your time to be the tight end one on this Ravens team is soon, but it's not now. I think Andrews is still most important tight end one, and Likely kind of fits in as a tight end two role, excuse me. And again, very boomer bust. I would only expect 2 or 3 huge games from him, and the rest just be subpar. So again, going into this matchup against Dallas, it makes it even worse for him. Okay, and then your final set.
I'm gonna go with Ezekiel Elliott. He's been more of like a flex play guy, and he's more of a touchdown upside type of player at this point in his career. I mean, he's also going against a really good Ravens defense. These past couple weeks, this Ravens defense has been able to hold the running back game very well. Zamir White had basically zero production this past week, and then when you go back to uh, the Chiefs game, Isaiah Pacheco, he had a solid game, but not what you were hoping. 15 rush attempts for only 45 yards, and only 1 touchdown. The other thing with Zeke, like I said, touchdowns is his big thing. He has only 16 carries for 56 yards. He does have the 1 touchdown, but he's only averaging 3.5 yards per carry. Like I said, as a flex guy, I would sit him. I mean, that's all you're really using him for. I would just go try to find someone else who's going to have more volume, especially in a game where I feel like it's going to be very pass heavy.
So for me, I'm going to go with a surprise, and it's going to be Jamison Williams. Now, Jamison Williams has had a great start to the year, 24.5 points in week one, 14.5 in week two. The numbers don't lie. I mean, he had a tremendous amount of success these first 2 weeks. And I just think overall, I think the Lions are going to kind of shift their attention to other guys like Amon-Ra, who had a quiet week one, but a strong week two. Laporta's had 2 quiet week ones in week two, and Laporta's one of the best tight ends, if not the best tight end in football. And that is a little bit of bias because I'm an Iowa fan, but still, Laporta's production last year as a rookie was sky high. And the Lions as a whole were able to have lots of success. And I think one of the reasons that the Lions can get back to that success is getting their 1-2 punch in Laporta and Amon-Ra going. Also, Goff has looked shaky at times as well, which, again, when quarterbacks look shaky, a lot of weird things happen. And like a lot of weird things happen, I mean, like a lot of random fantasy guys kind of start to bloom through the mix here. And I'm a big Jameson Williams fan, if not one of the biggest. And I definitely think the ceiling for him is through the roof. I think more than anything, the Lions need to get back to getting to Sam Laporta as well as Amon-Ra St. Brown, or at least continuing with Amon-Ra St. Brown. And I just think that Jameson Williams is kind of getting in the way with that. But he did have a great week one. I feel like he can't get much better than that for where his position is. So it's one of those things that it seems to be a downward trend. But going into Arizona, who's been playing relatively well in my opinion, I think it could be an intriguing matchup for him. But nonetheless, I think in this week in particular, you definitely got to sit him. Okay, sleepers. Who's your first?
I'm gonna go Deontay Johnson. Deontay Johnson was one of my favorite late round wide receivers that you could get. Obviously, he's a really slow start. Bryce Young just getting benched, Andy Dalton being named the starter. I think that yes, this offense is bad, but they're also going against the Raiders defense, who isn't much better. Yes, they have Max Crosby, who's solid, and Christian Wilkins, who I believe is questionable for this game. And DeAndre Johnson, I mean, only 34 yards, 5 catches, but I don't put a lot of that blame on him. Just Bryce Young hasn't had much time. It's more the offensive line just has been really screwing this team over. With Andy Dalton here, I mean, a veteran quarterback, I think he's going to give him the ball. And like I said, this Raiders defense hasn't been the best. Last week against the Raiders, uh, or last week when they played the Raiders, or when they're going to against, sorry, the last week when the Ravens played the Raiders, I mean, Zay Flowers has 71 receptions, 91 or 70 receptions, 91 yards, a touchdown. I mean, those are the type of numbers I could potentially see Deontay Johnson putting up. I mean, he's a big reception guy. If you're in PPR leagues, I mean, that's going to be his big thing is that underneath route, he's going to be that safety blanket. It's basically going to be a battle of who's going to get more of the 10-yard receptions. It's going to be Adam Thielen or Deontay Johnson because, yes, they're probably not going to push the ball down the field. They're going to have slow, methodical drives.
You were having a tough time talking
Yeah,
today,
I
aren't you?
don't.
We all have those
Yeah,
days, man, where we just can't get the words out and having
yeah.
success. But totally happens to the best of us. But yeah, it's one of those days for sure, especially since it's a Thursday night as we're recording this. And at least for me, I'm exhausted. Basically, my days, or I'm sorry, my weeks end on Thursday with like one class and really no practices and things like that. So my mind is completely on to weekend mode and again, kind of faltering as well. My first sleeper is going to be Deshaun Watson. I know you're saying I just said last week that it's time to turn the page on Deshaun Watson. I understand that. But Deshaun Watson had a little bit of a bounce back week last week. I mean, 22 for 34 could improve on that, but 186 yards. Most importantly, didn't throw an interception, which is great. And he also had a rushing touchdown. So getting a little bit of vintage Deshaun Watson back, at least he's trending in the right direction. Week one was a disaster to watch, but at least week two is a little bit better. You know, for the Cleveland Browns, they're going into this matchup against the Giants, which is at home too, which plays to their benefit. And I think one of the reasons why I have Deshaun Watson as a sleeper as well. But we all know what Deshaun Watson was able to do when he played for the Texans before, actually currently while he got his massages and things like that. We need him to get back to that position. We need Deshaun Watson to get back to that point where he's one of the best quarterbacks in football. And I think, you know, he's paid all this money. The Browns have said, no, Deshaun Watson's our guy. I'm not saying he's going to get back to the top three quarterback that Deshaun Watson was in fantasy, but I think there's an opportunity to, especially this week against the Giants, who's obviously struggled this season to start, and their defenses looked really bad, mainly because their offenses looked even worse. So I think this matchup is ideal for him. And again, this is going to be a lost cause if Deshaun Watson has a bad game against the Giants at home. Okay, who's your second sleeper?
So I have DeAndre Swift. Swift hasn't been the best this year, but he's going against a really bad Colts defense, especially against the run. The Packers and Josh Jacobs had just a field day against them just last week. And then even going back to week one, the Texans, that was the big game, Big Joe Mixon game, where he had 30 rush attempts, 160 yards, and a touchdown. Yeah, I get it. Swift's not on that level of a running back, but if that's the type of yards that they're giving up every single game at this point, and they're just locking down the receivers and they're just going to the running game, Swift showed off he can be a good receiving back, 4 for 5 last week on receptions and targets. I mean, if he's able to get you a good flex start this week, be able to get you probably 10 to 13 points, that's something that you could take, especially against a defense, like I said. They've given up over 125 yards each week up to this point, a rushing touchdown up to this point. Uh, Again, Swift is not on the same level as those two guys, but if that's the type of quality of defense that they've been showing each week, you gotta start starting running backs against this Colts defense until they can prove that they can stop the run.
Mine's going to be Devin Singletary again. I feel like I talk about Devin Singletary every week, and I'm going to continue to talk about Devin Singletary as a sleeper until he gets the recognition that he deserves. I had said in fantasy drafts that Devin Singletary I felt was like this year's Raheem Mostert. Raheem Mostert was counted out. I mean, he was so low on draft boards. Had a great season, obviously, but he was the Dolphins' RB1 going into the season, and Devin Singletary is the same way. Tyrone Tracy and Eric Gray really haven't stepped up to the plate. And we got a full kind of week from Devin Singletary as far as rushing is concerned, 16 for 95, which is a 6 average per carry and a touchdown. Only had the one reception for 0 yards, but I know that rushing value is going to come. So it's one of those things where I'm super excited about Singletary. Now, again, they're going into Cleveland, as I just mentioned with Deshaun Watson. I still think Singletary is going to have a good amount of success. I think he gets back to the 4 or 5 receptions, 15, 17 rushes, 60, 70 yards and a touchdown. And again, put that together, that's 16, 17 points. And again, for a guy that was drafted primarily as an RB3, maybe RB4, this is a perfect opportunity for him to get back in the swing of things and really kind of cement himself as an RB2. I have him comfortably as an RB2 in a couple of my leagues. So I'm feeling really confident about him, and I'm really liking this matchup in Cleveland. Okay, and then your final sleeper.
So I have Rashid Shaheed. Going against, I get it, it's the Eagles defense, but it hasn't been good, especially against the deep ball plays. Darnell Mooney just last week had, I want to say, it was like a 60-yard touchdown there. And then in week one, the Eagles gave up a pretty big touchdown to Jayden Reed. I want to say that one was closer to like a 50, 55-yard touchdown there. It's those big plays that they give up. They're also going to potentially miss C.J. Gardner-Johnson, who I wish does play because he is a former Saint, and there's a lot of controversy or beef going on between the organization and him. But there's a chance he's out also. Rashid Shaheed, he's been that big play guy. He's been that downfield threat. Two touchdowns this year, both on 50-plus yard touchdowns, seven receptions for 169 yards there. He's averaging 24.1 yards per reception. So, again, if he gets that big play once a game, that's what you're expecting at this point. He's going to be that push the field down wide receiver. He's only going to give you maybe 3 to 4 catches, but like I said, he's going to have that one big reception that could potentially be a touchdown. He's shown it so far in week one. I get it against Carolina, but he also did it against the Cowboys in week two. That consensus is that they have a really good defense. So it's one of those things that, yes, the Eagles are good, but their pass defense was bad last year, and it hasn't gotten much better this year.
So my final sleeper is the man, the myth, the legend himself, Carson Steele. Now, Carson Steele, obviously, tremendous story. I guess he has a pet alligator, which is absolutely amazing. He also, I guess, I thought he was a fullback. Like I'm pretty sure he's listed as a fullback,
Yeah.
but he kind of emerges himself as a RB1 per se. I know the Chiefs did just sign Kareem Hunt, but they literally did just sign Kareem Hunt like a couple days ago. Whether Kareem Hunt's able to jump into the mix, I think is up in the air. I think that was more of a I feel like a safety blanket. Like it's like this, like the second or third time they brought Kareem Hunt, who's played in the city, who's played in the organization, who knows the ups and downs. Because besides that, you got Carson Steele and Samaje Perine. So Carson Steele, he had some carries when Pacheco was on the field. Now that Pacheco's out 6 to 8 weeks at the minimum, he has a fractured fibula, so I wouldn't be surprised if it's a little bit more. I think Carson Steele definitely steps up to the plate and has success. Look, the Chiefs have made it known that they like to throw to the running back. They like to have the running back play. Yeah, Mahomes is a really great quarterback, probably the best of all time, but he has some issues at times as well, just like every quarterback does. So I think the only concern with Carson Steele is, are they going to go to a running back committee like they've done in the past? And I think there is some skepticism with that. But at the end of the day, you look at a guy like Carson Steele, he's got everything that you want in a running back or fullback. A funny guy on and off the field. And I think he could definitely be a sleeper. On top of that, he's gotten added in 53% of leagues. So talk about getting some hype about a guy in 1 week. Carson Steele, I definitely think has potential to do that and carry on moving forward. All right, give me your first
So
bust.
I have Jane Reed. As much as I love him, he did not have any production last week. Just without Jordan Love, it was a complete 180 against the Colts. He had more rushing yards, if I remember correctly. Yeah, he had two rush attempts for 37 rushing yards. He had two receptions for 9 receiving yards. It was just one of those things that just really couldn't get going, and the Colts defense hasn't been that good. They haven't been good against the run. Passes was a little bit better, but even then, in week one, CJ Stroud still had a pretty good week there for throwing like 270 something yards. And then I just don't see him really going. Malik Willis isn't the same quarterback as Jordan Love. They're not going to be able to do the same things. And I get it. They're going against the Titans, but the Titans also haven't been really giving up those big plays these past few weeks. Garrett Wilson had a solid game, didn't really do much there, and for deep plays, had 5 receptions, like 50, 60 yards. Week one, I believe DJ Moore is the leading wide receiver. He only had like 4 catches for 40 yards. The big plays that a Titans defense really hasn't been giving up. And now that Mike Willis is there for another week, obviously it'll be a couple more weeks. I think Jane Reed's value has just gone down. He may be a guy to go trade for in a lot of leagues. So a lot of people may be down on him for good reason. He didn't do much last week, and I don't see much potential of him doing much more for these next couple weeks. But once Jordan Love comes back, they could be a guy you could go out and trade for.
So my first bust is going to pain you, but it's Bo Nix. Bo Nix has had a tough start to his career. All in all, I mean, look, are we really rostering Bo Nix? Actually, surprisingly, he's rostered in 8% of leagues. Definitely has not had the start that you would expect, but hey, a lot of rookies started off like this. I mean, Caleb Williams, look, for example, he's not looked great either, but Bo Nix has definitely struggled. He's definitely has underwhelmed. He has 0 touchdowns to 4 interceptions, which again, going through some rookie pains there, but 11 points and 8 points. On top of that, going into a matchup against Tampa Bay, I just don't see it really working out for him this week. I am very optimistic about Bo Nix moving forward. Sean Payton obviously really likes Bo Nix and realizes that it's not a it's a more than a one step process. It's going to take time and it's going to get getting used to. And on top of that, Denver's also trying to move past the Russell Wilson saga and trying to create their own identity there. So again, Bo Nix, I think, is a lot of optimism about him moving forward. But as of now, I'm definitely avoiding him as much as possible until he can really figure it out because he's really got all the tools and tangibles he needs, but he's going through some of those rookie growing pains. All right, your next bust.
I'm gonna go with Trey McBride. Trey McBride did have a bounce back week. It's not really a targets thing. It's more of just going against the Lions defense. Lions defense has been really solid. I mean, last week against Buccaneers, Cade Otton had one a couple targets, not a single catch, not a single tight end on that Buccaneers offense had a catch. And then if you go back to week one against the Rams, I get the Rams don't have the best tight end room, uh, but Colby Parkins 4 catches, 47 yards. I mean, that Lions tight end defense has been really good against McBride, or really good against tight ends. And McBride, he's going to get the targets. I feel like he had 6 in week one, 9 in week two. It's going to be one of those things that he's going to have targets. He may get you 4 to 6 receptions, but I don't think he's going to get more than 50, 60 yards. I mean, he's probably someone you're still starting just because of where you drafted him and how bad tight ends have been as a whole, just because it's the upside of touchdown. But I don't think McBride's going to have a huge week here.
So if Bo Nix was having a bad start as a rookie quarterback, you know who else is having an even worse start as a rookie quarterback? Caleb Williams. He's my second bust. Obviously, a lot more hype with Caleb Williams. I understand it's not necessarily a Caleb Williams thing. I think it's partly it, but the Bears' offensive line has been atrocious. I don't know if anybody's watched any Bears games, but it's like really bad. I mean, it's been terrible. He has all the weapons around him to have success. He's just not had the time in the pocket. And again, going through some of those rookie growing pains there has just not really helped his cause at all. And especially too, they're going into a matchup against Indianapolis. Now, Indianapolis has had their fair shares of offensive issues. Anthony Richardson sometimes looks like the Lamar Jacksons of the world running the football, and then he looks like Malik Willis throwing the football. So it's one of those things where it's just a terrible combination to have. You never really know what you're going to get out of him. The Colts defense, however, I feel like is pretty solid. I think that they're just kind of mediocre. They're not going to necessarily blow it out of proportion and be a really great defense, but they're also not going to be bad. I think a lot of their defense play does hinder on the offense's performance as well, which makes sense, obviously. But for the Colts in particular, if Richardson's up, the defense is up as far as production. If Richardson is down, the defense is down. But all in all, Caleb Williams, again, it's going to take time for him. This is why I don't really like drafting rookies because, especially in redraft leagues, like it takes time to really develop into great players. I always say all the time, like look at Peyton Manning his rookie year and look how he made it to a Hall of Famer. So it's one of those things. It takes time, but I don't like Caleb Williams as a whole, especially going into this matchup at Indianapolis. Okay, and then your final
Yeah,
bust.
so Falbus, I'm going to stay on the same game as the Cardinals Lions. I'm going to go Sam Laporta. I'm fading both tight ends. The Cardinals against the Bills against Dalton Kincaid was really solid. I mean, Kincaid only had 1 catch for 11 yards. Dawson Knox, the other tight end, 1 catch for 23 yards. And week two against the Rams, I get the Rams tight ends. It's Colby Parkins again, as I mentioned earlier. Uh, they're not the same level as Sam Laporta, but in this game, Parkins only had 1 catch for 12 yards. I mean, the Cardinals are doing something right with their linebacking room to cover the tight end. And I get it, Sam Laporta had a great rookie year last year, but McBride also had a great year. I'm just fading both tight ends in this game. Both teams have really good linebacking groups, especially coverage linebackers against guys like Laporta and McBride. They showed it so far in the first 2 weeks against tight ends that they haven't allowed more than 3 catches or 4 catches to any tight end on any roster up to this point on either side. So I'm Sam Laporta. I'm fading. Same with McBride in the same game.
So my final bust is going to be Curtis Samuel. I'm the first to admit that I was a big Curtis Samuel fan. I'm still somewhat optimistic about him, but he's really not looked good to say the least. 2 receptions for 15 yards in week one and 1 reception for 3 yards in week two. I don't think it's necessarily the talent of Curtis Samuel. Again, I've said this before. I think it's just too many mouths to feed in Buffalo. They have two great tight ends, two relatively young tight ends. Obviously, Dalton Kincaid recently drafted. You also got some younger receivers in Keon Coleman, some other guys as well. So there's a lot of mouths to feed there. And I think eventually Curtis Samuel will get his opportunity to kind of shine and be a top tier fantasy option. But just for now, I don't see it really evolving into anything great. On top of that, they're playing on Monday night against Jacksonville, which again, you guys know how I feel about Monday night games. It is at home, so it's going to either be a boom or bust for him, and I'm just going to continue to go for bust until he kind of proves me otherwise. Thank you guys for listening to another episode here on The Truth. If you guys did enjoy it, make sure you follow The Truth on Twitter at The Truth as one to stay up to date with the latest information regarding The Truth, including podcast dates, podcast uploads, and other important information you don't want to miss. Make sure you guys also follow The Truth on Instagram and TikTok at the.tt.truth. Are you looking to find a drink that offers peak hydration, raises your energy levels, speeds up your recovery, and keeps your mind sharp through focus and memory? Look no further than the Acid Rainwater. I'm excited to partner with Bloodline Sports AZ and Acid Rainwater, which focuses on peak hydration and productivity, while also maintaining ecosystem-friendly product. Use code HESSON15, that's HESSON15, for 15% off every purchase. As always, I'm your host, the one you love the most, Niall Hesson, joined once again by AJ Ponciano. Take care and good night.